Hi, and welcome to this episode of Impetus Interviews, a series of conversations where we take a deeper dive into the projects showcased by the EU Prize for Citizen Science. This time round, we're joined by Raquel, Colacios, and Blanca, Calvo from the ASD Publics Playable Cities for All Citizen Science Initiative, who aim to enhance and design more accessible public spaces and playgrounds for neurodiverse individuals. Specifically those on the autism spectrum disorder who have or ASD. They are based in Barcelona, and at the 2024 EU Prize, they received an honourable mention. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, I was just wondering if you could go into the rationale behind how the ASD Publics project was set up and what your ultimate goals were at the early stages. I know these things kind of evolve and change as they go through, but yeah, if you could just explain, the inception of the project, I suppose.
Maybe Raquel, I start with the anecdote and then you explain the logic a bit more.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a personal anecdote about how this started and then it became a project. But basically, I am an architect. Raquel is also an architect. We are researchers, but we come from architecture. And I had this conversation with a person that works with autistic children. She's a psychologist. And she told me that that session she had with the one child, instead of having it at the office, they went to the park. And it was actually a horrible experience. So I started asking a lot of questions about why it was so wrong. And at that moment, I realized that we architects, urban designers, we have a huge role to play there. And we started looking for calls for proposals where we could bring this up. And then we saw this call from the new European Bauhaus, financed through the European Institute of Technology, that was like perfect for this project.
Yeah, basically the aim then was to to come up with design guidelines for open play public spaces that can meet the needs of autistic children and their families. So yeah, that was the main objective, also through a co-creation process that involved children and the families, but also therapists and psychologists, etc. And yeah, the goal was to come up with something that then designers can also take and use for the design of these public spaces.
No, that's very interesting. And the idea that just public spaces and playgrounds and that sort of thing are a limited resource for people, especially in urban areas, just having anywhere that's outside and having some green space. But yeah, for some individuals, especially at like busy times, they may not be so well accommodated, I suppose. I'm just wondering for those who, myself, I would like to learn a little bit more as well, but for other people listening in, what are some of the issues or challenges that families with ASD or these individuals do face, perhaps in the day-to-day of a playground that's not been accommodated for them, perhaps?
Blanca, if you want, I can start and then...
Sure.
Well, I have to say that although it's not strictly an architecture or a design issue, but the main challenge for families, it's a social challenge. It's the issue that people don't understand or they don't know that that children probably it's an autistic children, and then their behaviors can be shocking for other families, and so they find this type of situations where they don't feel welcome. But also, I would say one of the main challenges as well is to have probably a lot of noise. Also that the children run away. There's a lot of escapism among ASD children. So also for families, safety, it's an issue. It's one of the top issues to have into consideration. So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of challenges, and at the end, families were saying we don't go to the park, or we go, in times where there is very few people, because when the park is crowded, that can be a very, very difficult situation for them if they are in the park. I don't know, Blanca, if you want to add
Yeah,
something.
no, building on what Raquel was saying, and the social issues were the main ones. And many of these social issues happen because of spatial or physical issues. So like Raquel was saying, there's a lot of noise that can come from outside the park, but can also come from within the park, because of course children are very loud there. And then safety concerns, this thing Raquel was saying, they may run away, but also since autistic children, they struggle with social rules. There's something that we all have to learn. It's like if you take yourself and you put, like, we land in a society and we don't recognize the elements, we don't recognize the rules. So we have safety concerns. Like most children, they will learn by imitation. They see a child using a swing and they realize how to use it. But these children, it's not so obvious for them. If the swing looks different to the one they know, they won't recognize it, and sometimes they put their safety at risk, or they don't play with it because they don't understand how to play, and then it can cause situations that end up creating social problems. For example, like a parent was telling us, these long like jungle gyms that have enclosed spaces, and children are meant to move across this thing, but the child gets stuck there and then gets into a crisis, and the dad cannot access to rescue the child, or suddenly the child runs away from that thing that has many entrances. The dad doesn't know what to do. So it's many situations that come, like also like all autistic children are different, but very often related to safety, boredom. They get bored very easily. And conflicts with our families, like waiting for the play element to get free. That's a social rule. You have to understand you cannot push the other child. You learn this. And then sometimes like they also often sometimes like play elements that are for children younger than them. So you have a bigger child in the playground for young kids. And maybe that bigger child pushes the young kid and causes like a lot of commotion. So it's a range of problems and very often ends up in social issues.
Yeah, they normally bring this social aspect always, because it's when they don't understand or they don't, how to, maybe they have to finish playing with that because there's a line of children waiting for the swing. That creates a problem for the family, or they don't want to go back home, or they're just overwhelmed with noise or with movement that they have around. They get overwhelmed, and then they need like somewhere or some time to relax or to return to a calm space. And that you cannot find that in a park right now. It's just crowded, it's noisy, and then if there's any conflict, it's normal that you don't want to go back, no? If you're not feeling welcome.
Mm-hmm. So it feels like there's a bit of a catch-22 and multiple kind of avenues. So as you mentioned, yes, issues with noise and overcrowdedness can cause some people with autism or on the ASD spectrum discomfort, but also there's the aspect of wanting to integrate them with the other children at play, I suppose, and trying to match these to balance these two ways of thought, perhaps, of making these things that are accessible for all, but also, playgrounds are a limited space. Unfortunately, it would be nice if we could have a whole big park for everyone, but quite often they're kind of cramped into these little corners of green spaces anyway. So it feels like, there just seems to be a slight conflict between how to action these things, perhaps.
Yeah, and related to this, and Raquel said this earlier, like it's very hard to recognize an autistic child. Like there are other conditions that are very easy to spot. And so what do? We put a tag on them, but
Mm-hmm.
but parents don't want that because children are not the problem. So why do they have to have to wear a tag? Because that could solve some of the social issues and achieve integration. But the tag thing is also very unfair to them. So at the end of the day, like we have to find solutions are like halfway. None of them is going to be perfect, but you want them to be integrated, and you don't want to tag them. So you're going to find like halfways.
Yeah, it must be so strange to have to kind of put a little badge on yourself to denote that you're different to everyone else. And yeah, it might solve some issues, but it would raise others, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it also comes along with the idea of, I don't know, getting people with autism and ASD kind of uh, with ASD more, again, integrated and having them recognized more often as people that, yeah, they do exist in the world. They're not these people that you put a little badge on and you have to avoid, or they do exist. And there's a, as you say, children imitate each other. So having them being in this co-shared space would be beneficial for both, I suppose.
Totally.
Yeah,
At the
it
end,
limits their world if they cannot be there. So
exactly.
Raquel,
At the end, autism, it's a condition, no? It's a way of it's a how it's said in English. It's a developmental condition. So it's just the way they see the world. It's different. And that's not a problem. I mean, the only thing is that, as Blanca was saying before, right? You are in the middle of something that works in a certain way, but I mean, this world should also work in other ways, or at least have a space for other ways and for diversity to exist. And relating to what you were asking about I mean, also the limitation of a space, no? I mean, we don't have endless space to create parks and playgrounds. That's an issue, of course, and yeah, we have what we have. But also, if what we have, it's a bit more prepared, it's not attracting this type of infrastructures or that are attracting all children together in the same place. I think also I mean, I don't say that this doesn't have to exist, but I think that different type of playgrounds can be designed that are not always attracting children to the same space, but either having something a bit more structured, that they can see clearly where things are, that they can find a calm space if they need to. So something that for them it's not so overwhelming. I know children are loud, and if there's a lot of children, that's difficult. But also the way you design a space can also spread people in a way. No?
And Raquel is mentioning this thing of the calm space. That was possibly one of the main findings. Right now, if children need to calm down because they are overstimulated about what's happening in the playground, they have to leave. So the idea was to have, and that was one of the suggestions we came up with through ASD Publics, to have play spaces within the playground that are calm. So they can go into that space, but they don't have to be there by themselves. They can be there with, I don't know, with their siblings or with their parents, and they can play in a different way and calm down. And that's something, I mean, I think now there's other projects that are starting to bring this idea into public space or public transport, right, Raquel? I think in London, they're discussing these things. But that's something that we found was very, very important, because this moment of crisis, it's going to happen. Inevitably, it's going to happen in a playground. So let's have spaces that allow for this thing to end. And that's it. Acknowledge it, recognize it happens. Okay. Then we create these spots and the child can continue to stay there.
No, that's really interesting. And the idea of having this space where if these children are having an issue, they don't have to go home. They don't have to leave the park. They can go to this more quiet, secluded area, have a snack, put their headphones on or something like that, and just have a bit of a calm down. Or I'm not sure if that verbiage is very apt, but yeah, just to regroup and then go back and play, rather than having to perhaps go home and have that be the end of your trip out, perhaps.
Yeah. And then also, if they have to go home, also what they relate with that experience is that it was a bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
No? I mean, the memory that they will have is that it was not a good experience. But if you let them come and go back to the play area and they go back to play, probably the memory will be different.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps a lot because they need a lot of anticipation.
Sure.
Like they need to know exactly what they are going to do. So if you tell them we are going to the playground, if they have a memory that was something bad, probably they will not go. They won't want to go.
Mm-hmm. I suppose this leads quite nicely into my next question of, you mentioned that a major part of the ASD Publics project was this co-creation and this co-work between architects, town planners, the ASD community, and psychologists and therapists and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if you could describe that process and the citizen science kind of aspects of the project and how that fed into some of the decision making or recommendations that you came up with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would start by saying that as a team, we are a multidisciplinary team. So Raquel and I were both architects, urban planners, and we do research, but we were not the only player in ASD Publics and Play Out the Box. So we work with autism experts. I mean, they are like, as you said, psychologists and also occupational therapists from a center called IGAIN. Actually, the first project we work with the patients.
Mm-hmm.
We also involved an autism association, which actually is one that it's families and they care about the leisure of the children. So we had like people from the associations who are experts themselves, but also they brought the families, etc. And we worked in the first project with an association of architects, but also quite multidisciplinary, but experts in participation with children. And in the second one, we work with a carpentry school. There's the second one we were building things.
Mm-hmm.
So the team itself was very multidisciplinary. Raquel, you want to take the part about participation with families?
Okay. So as Blanca was saying, it was the project. It was like in 2 stages. So for the ASD Publics that we were creating these guidelines, design guidelines, what we did, it's a co-creation process that incorporated first a shadowing process that we did to understand how children are and behave when they are in the park. So we followed 4 families in their normal day going to the park, and we were just taking notes and seeing, I mean, what was that they liked and whatnot. And then we did 4 co-creation workshops that we did in public space in Barcelona, and there we designed a kind of a playscape. So we were in Las Glorias Square, which is a big area. It's just grass and trees. It has no play infrastructure. That was something that we looked specifically. So they were not like distracted with other things, but concentrated in the workshop. And so we delimited a space and we put inside this space different play elements that they were like specifically placed to stimulate a different sense, movement, you know, behavior, posture, whatever. So we were like putting things for visual stimulation, olfactory, tactile, for also vestibular, psychomotor, so looking for balance, movement, this type of things, right? Also, we incorporated calm spaces, like enclosed areas where they can also be more quiet. And yeah, basically 2 people from this architect association that they work a lot with participation, they were inside the area. And it was all with non-verbal communication. So just children could move, and we were just mapping all the movements and the interactions they were making with the different objects. And also in parallel, we did interviews with the families of the children participating. And we did also survey among families of this Autism Association in Barcelona. That was for the ASD Publics, that we then did the design guidelines. And then for the play out the box, we were actually building play elements with this carpentry school. We did several workshops with families, occupational therapists, the Autism Association, etc. Kind of like co-designing these elements. And then we had 2 sessions where children could come and play with the elements. And that's I mean, those sessions were really also informative for us, because we could see the children playing with the elements and which adjustments and modifications we have to do. I mean, those were very interesting also for us.
Yeah. Something that it's important to note here is we're very familiar with the project, but I guess for people who are not familiar with autism, maybe it's not that obvious, but most of these children are nonverbal, so they don't talk. And that's why doing a regular workshop with most of them, some do, it wasn't really something viable. So we did not have them. I mean, some did talk, and of course, families would tell us how the children were feeling and sometimes what the children said. But we tried to not interact a lot with them, also to not overwhelm them. So we had like experts that engage with them, but it was not everyone asking questions. But yeah, children were mostly not like actively saying what they liked, but we gave them a lot of options and looked at what they liked. So it was not like the type of very active participation. It was a bit more passive, but because we had this limitation with language, and families were really active then.
That's such an interesting concept, because yeah, when it comes to, well, developing these guidelines and prototyping, so it seems like there was 2 prongs to the project. There was the creation of these guidelines, using these workshops with multidisciplinary partners, and then working along with these guidelines was creating these new tools, these toys that could be then integrated into the parks, and see how well these children interacted with them. But yeah, the evaluation must have been something that, the process of this must have been something that you'd have to quite carefully consider, because if they're non-verbal, I suppose you can somewhat quite easily tell if children are enjoying a toy, if they don't want to get off, or if they want to stay in it for a long time. But yeah, it feels like it must be a much more qualitative rather than quantitative kind of interpretation, perhaps.
I mean, before the qualitative and quantitative, I want to say something that's very specific to autism, and that's why it came very handy having the families, but also experts. So it's not that easy to know if an autistic child is enjoying or not. It's sometimes like their facial expression or the things they do doesn't necessarily like once, for example, I was looking at a child and we had this circuit with carpets, and she was doing it like so many times over and over, and it ended up with, I don't know, something was hanging and whatever. She was doing it so many times, I thought she was loving it. I mean, in my notes was like, oh, she's doing it over and over, she's loving it. And then I saw the mother stop her, and I didn't really understand what was happening. And then I was told that it was a ritual. So they sometimes get stuck into something they're doing, and they create a ritual, and that could cause frustration. So it was super important to have families and people who understand autism. If you're not an expert or that, or even if you don't know the child, sometimes it's hard to know if they're really enjoying or not. I mean, Raquel was the one who did most of the data analysis for actually a lot of quantitative exact stuff. So I think you can deal with that.
Yeah, no, but I was just going to say the exact same thing as you were saying, because you can have all the quantitative data, but that's so important to know the qualitative, no? And for us, what made the point was, okay, maybe as Blanca was saying, this children has gone through the circuit like 50 times, and you think it's loving it, but in reality, it's not. So having the experts there was, basic. That's something that it had to be, because you could understand if they were enjoying, If not, also when some children, we had the moments that they were overwhelmed and they were dysregulated and they were in crisis, and so having them also to rescue them, to kind of, okay, let's take a moment and relax. That was also very, very necessary. So yeah, I mean, that was also, we had also the experts filling like a form in which they were giving us all these details, all these kind of details.
But indeed, the quantitative data was quite useful because we produced a lot of maps for each child, and children move very fast. So we had to change maps every 10 minutes, something like this. So it's like lots of layers. And you could see what elements they played a lot with and which ones they ignored. So at least we know which ones like caught their attention the most. But also sometimes there's this thing, right? Like if you don't know how to play with something, they won't engage with this thing. So sometimes a bit hard to extract conclusions, and you had to talk to experts that really understand how autism works and families. And also like something that happened in ASD Publics when we did the first workshop, it rained. So we had to do it indoors.
Sure.
And there was this play element. Do you remember, Raquel, I don't know how to call that in English. It's like, how would you describe that? Like a tube made of fabric. You know, usually it's on the ground and kids go inside. It's like a spiral with a fabric. And the facilitators decided to set it vertically to make it different. And the first day was like total success, like children playing constantly with that, even simultaneously several children. In the next workshops, we were outdoors. They all ignored it. What happened? I don't know, they were more interested in other things or not, but that's also sometimes things that can happen, and it's a bit hard to get conclusions, even with the quantitative data.
Yeah.
No, that's super interesting. I suppose this kind of leads on to my next question. It kind of goes back to the first stage, I suppose, but I imagine they fed into each other. The findings from the prototyping then went back into the guidelines and the recommendations. I'm just wondering if you could detail, I don't know, some of the findings or the recommendations that the ASD project came up with, I don't know, designing a park for ASD communities.
We have already mentioned quite a few of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
sure.
we can list some of them. I mean, as we were saying.
We grouped them in 4 parts, right? Like if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
General characteristics of the space, then of the play elements themselves. There was one about managing the space. There were many things that were management, and this one we haven't talked much about. And then other considerations. I think we've been focusing mostly in the characteristics of the play area.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's list things like including calm spaces within the park. That was one thing. Mitigating stimuli from outside. Make them intelligible and easier to navigate. It's like usually paint or something that helps children move from, understand that's the space for the swing, that's the space for that, and how to move around.
Also, in terms of management, social issues, there were like having, for example, these pictograms for children to understand how you play with that. Also making easy the transitions from one game to the other. So maybe incorporating, I don't know, some small play elements, or also for the waiting moments, for them to not get stressed, to have something that they can be distracted while they are waiting to go for the swing or whatever. Yeah.
We considered having play facilitators or something in Barcelona here. There's a program to go to the parks with children. And so that follows one family. We decided to have one at the park, or at least at particular time slots, so they can facilitate and help with the social issues mostly, but also like help children that don't know how to play, etc. We suggested to create an app or a website that kind of like, we wanted to bring together many things. First, it was anticipation, so you could show them, okay, we're going to this park, it has these play elements, as that's very important for them. Sometimes you take them to the park and they're thinking of that one park, you take them to the wrong one. it's a drama.
Yes.
But also was like a platform for communicating amongst themselves, like having reviews of what they like, or hey, there's this thing, informing local government. That's I think was there another aspect in the app web? I think that was mostly it, right?
Yeah, that I mean that we were envisioning this
Mhm.
that this app would be something useful. I would also say, because there was something that came up with from the guidelines that then led to the next project, that the Play Out the Box, is that also many families, they were seeing that the different play elements, maybe they were not meeting the needs of their children. And many times they were saying, if we could only have a structure that I can come with my these fabric swings and just hang it here so my child can play, or if we can have something that a big box or a big container that has other type of games that we can take into the playground and they play, and then you can keep them. So that was something so that everything is not so static, right? That there are other options also. So that was something that inspired the next stage of the project, the Play Out the Box. That's why we were building prototypes of play elements that can be in the playground, but they are mobile. I mean, it's not something fixed, but it's stored somewhere, so families can take it, play, and then just keep it again.
And this is very important, because like when we started the project with the autism expert, right, the type of things they were asking the playground for, like fabric swings or heavy blankets or stuff that you cannot really have in a public space. Because they have to be durable, and there's many regulations, all these issues. And having this type of non-permanent elements that can be there managed, of course, or that people can bring, but you have something you can like clip this on, then it sorted out a lot of the regulatory blockages that we were encountering, and like many like of the things that were suggesting, like as an architect would never suggest that. And eventually we came to terms with like, okay, if this is it, we have to find ways to work with that. And Play Out the Box, the second project, actually the elements we designed, they're not elements to remain in the public space, but yeah, they're elements that are related to well, we call it play container. It's like this type of infrastructure that exists here in Barcelona, which is a shipping container that has been adapted to have like to work as a outdoors playroom. There's one in Paris, I believe, to Raquel. I don't know if there are other ones, but the idea was to design elements that are suitable to the children, but they can be stored and put back in and on.
That's really interesting, and I like the idea of having these like creator aspects, just sort of having a carabiner that you can connect a fabric swing that the child is very familiar with, or having aspects that, yeah, you can bring your own elements to the park and make it more personable to that child's experience. And I also found it very fascinating that, again, I suppose kind of leads into my next question about these communities and these families. They've responded well, but they can also, you're hoping to provide them with an avenue to provide continual feedback, I suppose, and to make future changes and have a bit more of a dynamic system within the park rather than having it static for 5-10 years, perhaps.
They were very receptive, that's for
Yeah.
sure. They feel unheard. They feel like nobody asked them, etc. So they were super welcoming. The experience was really, really good working with them, because they feel very abandoned by the public administration. I mean, these projects we're working were very short projects, so we have like limitations. With the first one, we focus mostly on like trying to influence policy and the way designers design, because like, the moment the project ends, like we are a bit helpless. We're not in control of public playgrounds. So we try to influence the policies of totally accessible design or universal design. So they include this type of considerations, and right now they don't. But also, yeah, giving architects a bit of like food for thought about how to make these things better. With the second project, the idea is that the product, and I believe they are there, I'm not totally sure because this is something that we're not managing, but the games we designed, they remained in that play container. So whenever the container is open, those games are available, but also we created a manual, a design manual with instructions so they can be replicated like they were for the prize. So I think that what happens later is a bit outside of our control. So we try to create tools so that other people can do something about it. How do you see it, Raquel? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's the issue. We finish when the project finishes. It's out of our hands. So that's why we created everything. It's open source, right? The design guidelines, the co-creation guideline, but also the play kit. That it's the instructions manual to build. In fact, you can build those games and having. I mean, we were thinking on nurseries or maybe schools or even individuals that want to have a game from the Play Out the Box project. And I have to say it works because we've had the experience that for the IMPETUS exhibition in the arts festival. They built two of them, and it was super fast and no problem. Everything was super clear. So yeah, we've received like positive feedback in this sense. And I mean, what we try to do is that it reaches as many people as possible. But yeah, it's also difficult when the project is finished, or even to continue with the communication and dissemination, right? That's something we would need to do a bit more.
It's great to hear that the positive experience that you had of surrounding the Ars Electronica Festival and the EU Prize, and that you've been able to get this information out there and just promote the project as a whole to perhaps further your cause a little bit. And it's also, yeah, having these open source kind of guidelines and recommendations feels like at the core of how to drive policy, and having just this information available, not just for parks, I suppose. I imagine quite a lot of the recommendations could be applied to multiple different situations, perhaps public transport to a degree, or art galleries, or like museums and that sort of thing. So yeah, so all this information has been made public access and been made available, has it?
Yeah, it's all in the project's website. I mean, to make a bit of publicity, asdpublics.eu. It's all there.
And are you hoping that these recommendations might be taken up by other cities, taken up by other municipalities, perhaps?
I mean, we know that from Barcelona, okay, because that's the ones we have easier conversations. We know that some they don't like they are in a policy of removing fences from the parks, and they're not in favor of putting up fences. So that one we know it's not viable for Barcelona. I don't know for other places, but there's other ways of like creating barriers for the child to not escape that are not a fence. But I mean, they do have an interest, and I think that's the thing, right? Like we do advocacy, and the point is like you need to really keep pushing. You need a champion in the city that pushes for these things to happen. As being a university, I mean, you're sitting outside of it, but many of them they did not have an issue with, and they like them. And when we met with how they call it, the Professional Association of Architects here, I remember the guy who was in charge of accessibility, and he was super positive about this thing, right? It was like, for me, it's like an amazing design brief, so much fun. I can create, like architects will receive briefs and we have to do something. So for him, it was like a great challenge to play with. We were also contacted by somebody from a village I can't remember where, Raquel, somewhere in Spain.
Yeah.
That had an interest.
They also were interested because they were trying to incorporate this type of vision to their design of the public space. But I have to say it's No, what I was saying, it's when we are working with, I mean, small projects, let's say, they were very short. So you miss the time to really invest in advocacy, dissemination, and be able to really change something, right? But we are in the, I mean, we are in the on the way of getting it and trying to get more funding. And Blanca and myself, we are trying to get more resources to continue with this research. And so, yeah, it's kind of maybe a starting point.
And we're meeting more and more people who are interested in the topic. I mean, we cannot claim that we made everything, but you can see there's more articles in like published articles about this. So there is a bit of growth, and when we want to start a project, we contact new people, so that raises awareness, and people are respond very positively. But for municipalities to really implement change, that sometimes takes long.
I like the idea that these principles also give the architects of these areas a little bit of room to play a little bit as well. They can try and design sort of different, not just a set of swings and a slide and the jungle gym perhaps, but to, I don't know, take kind of play design in a slightly different direction, I suppose. And I think that's also quite a fun idea. I know that you've mentioned it ever so slightly, but yeah, what are the future? I know that you've talked a bit about playing outside the box. Is that the follow-up project to ASD Publics? I'm just wondering, yeah, what's in the immediate or far future for the project?
So I mean, it was the two stages, the ASD Publics and Play Out the Box. And they, I mean, they are both finished already. And so, yeah, we have our guidelines, open access there. So for anyone that wants to know a bit more, you can find them. And now basically we are looking for funding to continue with the research. And also more in the policy aspect, right? We are not, I mean, we did the Play Out the Box, which was great because we could build something and really make a change. Also for children, I think participating, it was very nice to be able to play with something. But our research would move a bit more towards really changing the policy aspect of design of cities, that they have into consideration the needs of autistic people. I mean, not just children, but autistic individuals in general. So yeah, that would be our next step.
And I suppose it's just important just to have people more aware of individuals with different needs, different ways of looking at the world, and making the world more accommodating and easier to kind of navigate for everyone, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, even if the project makes no physical changes, raising awareness is a huge change already. And I think we are quite good at that.
Oh, sorry, Raquel, did you have something you wanted to add?
No. Go ahead.
And yeah, I think it's just very important to try and make these places a nice and relaxing experience for everyone, even like for the children, but also for the parents. If the parents are on tenterhooks, kind of being worried about their children not having a good time, that means they're not having a good time. And yeah, it's a feedback loop, I suppose. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask if there's anything else you'd wanted to add that we haven't really mentioned in the last 40 minutes or so.
I don't have anything specific in mind. I think we've covered most of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I think we're in good time for your next meeting. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation. And yeah, if you're wanting to find more information about the ASD project and their outcomes, you can visit the IMPETUS website or follow the links in the descriptions. But I just want to say thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, bye for now. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.